chapter. If you haven't, please, before the end of the event, we have sign-up sheets. Please leave your contact information so you can be notified of any upcoming Federalist Society events. There are no more for this semester, so particularly 2Ls and 1Ls that may be interested in learning about future events. Please go ahead and sign up. In addition, I'll just quickly describe, read to you the, founded in 1982, the Federalist Society of Law and Public Policy Studies is a group of conservative and libertarians dedicated to reforming the current legal order. We are committed to the principles that the state exists to preserve freedom, that the separation of governmental powers is central to our Constitution, and that it is emphatically the province and duty of the judiciary to say what the law is, not what it ought to be. The Society seeks to promote awareness of these principles and to further their application through its activities, such as this. And if you allow me a moment, just as a conservative and a 3L, some nostalgia, I do want to extend my thanks to the university and the School of Law to allowing the Federalist Society to host these events year after year. And although we may have different opinions on how to apply the law, we have always been welcomed with open arms.
Not all schools have that, so bravo, bravo.
And I'd also like to extend some thanks to our president, Ryan Eckerson. He has done a great job this year growing the Federalist Society. We've had a number of successful events, a discussion on net neutrality, a debate on freedom of speech on college campuses, a Second Amendment event, a trip to the Federalist Society National Student Symposium in Washington, D.C., and finally this event on restoring our lost confirmation. So congratulations, Ryan. So we will be having a debate today. Professor Josh Blackman is here. He will be afforded 20 minutes. Professor Goldstein will be responding for approximately 15 minutes, and then we'll leave it to an open, fluid discussion. And of course, if anyone has any questions, I'll be able to call on you, and you can ask those at that time. Professor Josh Blackman is an associate professor of law at the South Texas College of Law, who specializes in constitutional law, the United States Supreme Court, the intersection of law and technology. Josh is the author of the critically acclaimed Unprecedented, the Constitutional Challenge to Obamacare. Josh was selected by Forbes magazine for the 30 Under 30 in Law and Policy. Josh has testified before the House Judiciary Committee on the constitutionality of executive action on immigration. He is an adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute. Josh is the founder and president of the Harlan Institute, the founder of Fantasy SCOTUS, the internet's premier Supreme Court fantasy league, and blogs at joshblackman.com.
You should all play.
Josh leads the cutting edge of legal analytics as director of the judicial research at Lex Predict. Josh is the author of over 24 law review articles. His commentary has appeared in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, USA Today, LA Times, and other national publications. Josh clerked for the Honorable Danny J. Boggs on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit, and for the Honorable Kim R. Gibson on the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Pennsylvania. Josh is a graduate of the George Mason University School of Law. And our respondent here today, Professor Jared Goldstein, needs no introduction. He is one of our own. But while serving as an associate at Shearman and Sterling in Washington, D.C., Professor Goldstein became one of the first civilian lawyers allowed into the Guantanamo Bay prison in conjunction with his representation of several families of Kuwaiti detainees. After resistance from the United States government, the Supreme Court agreed to hear the case in Rasul versus Bush. Professor Goldstein's involvement with the Guantanamo case included drafting district, appellate, and Supreme Court briefs on behalf of the detainees. Additionally, Professor Goldstein was a Bristow Fellow in the Office of the United States Solicitor General and served as an attorney for the Department of Justice, working in the appellate section of the Environment and Natural Resources Division, where he drafted briefs on behalf of the United States in several Supreme Court cases. He received numerous awards while working at the Department of Justice, including the Special Commendation for Outstanding Service, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration General Counsel's Award. Professor Goldstein, as you know, teaches constitutional law and an array of environmental law courses. He regularly publishes in top law journals, and because of his national recognized expertise, he has authored numerous briefs in the Supreme Court of the United States. And currently, I just found this out, he is finishing up a book on the constitutionality of constitutional theories of nationalist movements.
Ooh. Tea parties?
Tea Party's got a chapter.
I knew it would be. Can I start?
One moment. So we're here today to discuss restoring our Constitution. Today's discussion will center around the confirmation of the United States Supreme Court justices.
Can I start now?
Sure, you could go.
All right. Thank you for that welcome and warm introduction. It's a pleasure to be back here. I'm actually publishing an article in the Roger Williams Law Review. You sent me an edit last night. I'm anticipating because I'm here today. I already sent it back. It's good to go. First, my good friend Peter Margulies. I've authored another briefs with him over the years. And Jared Goldstein and I have become debating partners. We take this show on the road. It's a pleasure to be here. Our topic today is restoring the lost confirmation. During his speech nominating Chief Judge Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court, President Obama faulted Democrats and Republicans alike for their prior positions on judges. He said, "There's politics involved on both sides." He's right. Over the past 3 decades, presidents and senators from both parties have ratcheted up the tensions over Supreme Court nominees. And the linchpin for that conflict is what's become a meaningless ritual, the confirmation hearing, but not for the reason you may think. The conventional wisdom maintains that, in their current form, judicial confirmation hearings serve no meaningful purpose. This is because nominees who are rationally self-interested in being confirmed refuse to answer any questions that could jeopardize their prospects. Instead, the theory goes, when asked a controversial question, the nominees equivocate and obfuscate. Prospective judges, nominated by presidents of both parties, are trained through rigorous murder boards to provide answers that are designed to shed as little light as possible on how they'll behave if confirmed. The end result was accurately described by one scholar 2 decades ago. Quote, "When the Senate ceases to engage nominees in meaningful discussion of legal issues, the confirmation process takes on an air of vacuity and farce, and the Senate becomes incapable of either properly evaluating nominees or appropriately educating the public." That scholar was Elena Kagan. Perhaps because of her astute awareness of this phenomenon and to ensure her own confirmation, the former Harvard Law School dean and Solicitor General did what all nominees do. They answered no questions. Please have a seat. This conventional wisdom, however, is based on an incomplete account of how confirmation hearings have devolved. While the platitude that the dysfunctional state of the confirmation process stems from the nomination of Robert Bork is surely true, there's a widespread misunderstanding of what exactly went wrong at the Bork hearings. The core problem is that the types of questions asked by both Democrat and Republican senators are the sorts of questions of concern to legal realists. The emphasis is on legal results rather than legal reasoning, and on cases the court has decided rather than clauses of the Constitution. In short, each side is trying to get nominees to tip their hands about how they will rule on issues that senators care about, rather than inquiring into how the nominee reasons about the Constitution. This emphasis on results rather than reasoning, on cases rather than clauses, is slanted towards a living constitutionalism. This realist approach will always yield what Sanford Levinson has called, quote, unhappy endings for one side or the other. The gravitational force of originalism, however, prevents nominees from candidly admitting that they will, or believe they should, manipulate legal modalities to achieve whatever result they like. Hence, the challenge for nominees is this: how to appear constrained by the text of the Constitution while avoiding alienating supporters and empowering opponents with the suggestion they might rule the wrong way in a future case. What went wrong for the Bork hearing? was that his original intent approach appeared to threaten too many past precedents and future results that Democratic majority of the Senate cared deeply about. One note, had the Republicans enjoyed a majority in the Senate, as they did when Justice Scalia was confirmed, we would have had a Justice Bork. But from that debacle, candidates have learned to adopt three rhetorical moves that allow them to skate away from questions about results. These moves have rendered confirmation hearings all but pointless. By focusing on the meaning of clauses of the Constitution, rather than the cases of the Supreme Court, however, a handful of senators can steer the hearings toward the solid ground of legal reasoning, rather than the shifting swamps, as it were, of legal realism. So let me walk you through these three moves. Move one, profess fidelity to the text of the Constitution and to its original meaning, but especially to the more general principles underlying the text. All judges do this. Move number two, profess fealty to stare decisis, a commitment to legal precedent, even when, actually especially when, the court's precedents have deviated from original meaning in ways that meet contemporary political approval. Move number three, when asked to apply any of the court's precedents to the current cases or controversies of most concern to the senators, the nominee must decline to answer on the ground that the case may come before the court later. Through this approach, the justice to be delicately follows the committee's lead along the confirmation tightrope, saying just enough to bolster the confidence of senators from the president's nominating party, while providing as little ammunition as possible to ignore the senators from the other party. Justices have been perfecting this balance for 3 decades now, but recent confirmation hearings have been a master class in how to give answers while revealing nothing. My colleague Randy Burnett and I analogize this to Seinfeld. The show about nothing? This is the hearings about nothing, indeed. Indeed, several confirmation hearings illustrate disquieting trends. Republican and Democrat nominees all profess fidelity to the text of the Constitution, to its principles, but in the same breath profess a greater fidelity to stare decisis. Adhering to stare decisis helps both Republican and Democrat nominees avoid awkward questions about areas where the Constitution's original meaning might lead it to unpopular results. When coupled with a refusal to answer questions about any issue that might come before the court, magic words, come before the court, confirmation hearings have been drained of any ability to generate answers that could help either side to fairly assess, let alone oppose the nominees of the other party. Okay? This unfortunate state of affairs is made possible by both Democrat and Republicans unreflectively embracing a legal realist approach, if not to the Constitution itself, then to the practice of constitutional law. In essence, both sides believe, or act as if they believe, that the Constitution is only what the Supreme Court says it is. It's not. As nominees, the Constitution is whatever the Supreme Court has said it is in the past. But after confirmation, the Constitution becomes whatever they may wish it to be in the future. Today we live in a world in which progressives and conservatives, Democrats and Republicans share the legal realist perspective, the preoccupation with just results that accord with one's own convictions. So justice must be chosen who will reach the politically correct result, or be opposed because they will reach the wrong result. These hearings have turned, therefore, into a game of gotcha. Questioners try to trip up the other side's nominees, and the nominees refuse to reveal the only thing that inquisitors on both sides truly care about: how they will rule in a particular case that's likely to come before the court. Now, my friends, it doesn't have to be this way. There is a different way. Instead of focusing on cases the courts decided, which they can't talk about, you can focus on clauses of the Constitution. And instead of talking about specific results, how will a certain case come out, they should ask about reasoning. Critically, the senators, or at least a couple of them, can start inquiring, what is the meaning of the Constitution separate from the cases of the Supreme Court? It's far too easy to say, aha, I'll tell you what Heller said, and I'll tell you what this case said or that case said. But asking them about their own understanding of the clause is far more meaningful. I'll give you a number of questions that could be asked. Professor Bogus in the room, we'll talk about this later, I'm sure. Does the original meaning of the Second Amendment protect an individual right to bear arms? Careful. What was the original meaning of the Privileges or Immunities Clause of the 14th Amendment? Hint, it included a right to bear arms. Did the 14th Amendment incorporate the Bill of Rights? And if so, how and why? Does a necessary and proper clause delegate unlimited authority to Congress so long as its exercise is convenient? Does the Ninth Amendment protect judicially enforceable unenumerated rights? Where in the text of the Constitution is so-called spending power? It's not there. And does it have any enforceable limits? None of these questions should be answered by referring to a specific case. And if a nominee says, let's talk about X versus Y, say, no, I'm not interested in cases. That they can answer. Additionally, senators need not ask how the meaning of these clauses should be applied in particular circumstances, right? Because you can avoid those questions in one of three ways, right, that I mentioned earlier. They should simply ask the meaning itself and how it should be ascertained. Do nominees think they are bound by the original public meaning of the text? Even those who deny this still typically claim that original meaning is a factor or a starting point. If so, ask them what other factors they think a justice should rely on to interpret the meaning of the text. Senators should even ask questions that seem completely resolved today. This provides a window into a judge's philosophy. For example, a senator could ask whether, quote, we the people in the Constitution originally included free people of African descent and slaves. Ask that question, see what they say. Abolitionists like Lysander Spooner and Frederick Douglass contended that it did. Chief Justice Roger Taney denied that in the Dred Scott case. The answer to this question will tell you a lot more about a nominee's approach to constitutional interpretation rather than routine questions about Brown versus Board of Education. Given that this is hardly a case that will come before them, on what grounds could a nominee refuse to answer such a question? Would it be unfair to ask nominees to the Supreme Court what they believe the Constitution means and why they believe it? Such questions could certainly be challenging, but why shouldn't we expect nominees to have studied the Constitution before they're given a lifetime tenure to interpret it? And repeating the catechism of previous Supreme Court decisions is not the same thing as opining the meaning of the Constitution itself, unless you assume, of course, that the Constitution really is what the Supreme Court says it is. And I don't believe that. If confirmed, nominees will get to vote whether they think they had previously decided case. If confirmed, nominees will get to say whether they think previously decided case was rightly decided. It is essential to understand their knowledge and perspective on this history before the Senate elevates them to the High Court. Inquiring into clauses, not cases, would also require senators to learn about the meaning of the Constitution. Yes, senators too have to learn. Beyond hearing the nominees' answers, it will be enlightening to hear what the members of the Judiciary Committee think about these topics. Such a hearing would not only be entertaining, but I think it will be informative and educational. The benefits of such an originalist confirmation hearing are manifold. I harbor no illusion that members of the Senate Judiciary Committee all possess sufficient knowledge to meaningfully engage in this line of questions, beyond reading prepared questions from staffers, which is what they most do. The problem with these pre-programmed line of questions from staffers is that savvy nominees can easily throw the senator off with a discourse on a related topic. Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Kagan did this masterfully. A senator would throw a question at them, and they would just spin it around, and their head would spin. They have no idea what just happened to them. It was a masterclass. Kagan and Roberts. Gorsuch, not quite as good, but Kagan and Roberts were I mean, if you want to see advocacy, they just took these senators and their heads were spinning. They had no idea what to say. They were just in their dust. Gorsuch, not as good, but Kagan and Roberts were wonderful. But we don't need a cadre of originalist senators. The beauty of the approach that I advocate here is that no rules need to be changed. No bipartisan agreement needs to be reached. And the Republicans in the Senate committee need not even be of the same mind. For this approach to restore the lost confirmation hearing, we need only a senator or two to focus their limited time on originalism. And I have full confidence that the committee's counsels on both sides are quite capable of generating useful questions for the nominees. Right? Imagine if a handful of senators, perhaps Ted Cruz of Texas or Mike Lee of Utah, they're both Supreme Court clerks, grilled the next justice to be on the questions we asked above, right? Whenever the nominee refers to case law, the senator interrupts, says, "Excuse me, sir, I am not interested in precedent. Once confirmed, you can change that. I want you to discuss matters that you cannot change. You can't change the meaning of the Federalist Papers, the Anti-Federalist Papers, Blackstone's commentaries, the records of the Constitutional Convention, the records of the ratification of the 14th Amendment. You can't change those. Tell me what those things mean. I don't want to hear what the Supreme Court says. That's malleable." Any effort to shift back deciding cases will be swiftly halted. Now, it's possible the nominee might be tripped up, and that's the last time that'll happen. With such a rough going, the tenor of the debate would immediately change. With the information revealed by such hearings, senators would be in a position to vote as they did with Robert Bork, based on whether they agreed with the judicial philosophy of a nominee. In this way, restoring the lost confirmation hearings will go a long way to reviving the structural feature of our Republican Constitution. Now, I am not Pollyanna, right? I'm not naive. There are reasons why this may not be practical. I'll give you a couple of them, right? First, Republican senators don't want to make the job more difficult for a Republican nominee. And there are certain incentives why they wouldn't want to do this. Because imagine Ted Cruz asks Neil Gorsuch a question he doesn't know the answer to and makes Gorsuch look bad. So I think this would actually happen if you have cross-party appeal. So if there was a Democrat nominee and Republican senators grilling them, imagine if Justice Garland or Judge Garland was asked these tough questions about Blackstone and the like. He has no idea. You can be sure that the next nominee coming up will be trained on that stuff, right? So even if this is not enough to keep a nominee from being confirmed, it's enough to make the nominees in the future learn, I got to study this stuff. And hey, I'm happy with that. If a judge has to study this material, maybe when they're confirmed, they'll use it. Maybe they won't, maybe they will. But I only see an upshot to this approach. The current process is broken. I don't see people suddenly turning up and saying, okay, we'll just stop giving these hearings altogether. So this is an approach to make it more meaningful and make it more substantive. I'll stop here, turn to my good friend, Professor Goldstein, and I welcome your comments. Thank you all so much.
I have to pick them up. It's skeleton mode. Is that from Coco?
No, it was from Coco?
No, I'll tell you later.
No, I can't teach without it. Is anyone who's been in one of my classes? What? I'll explain later. Thank you, Josh, for that talk. I appreciate it. This morning, while I was driving my daughter to school, my daughter's 13, I told her I was having this debate, and she said, "Oh, I've got some advice." She said, no matter what your opponent says, no matter what he says, what you got to stand up there and the first thing you should say is, "Well, that was bullshit." And I said, "Ruby, I can't say that. That's not appropriate. I mean, that's not. Don't I have to listen to him and respond?" She said, "No, that's what your opening line's got to be." But in fact, that's not how I feel at all. I don't actually. There's actually a lot of common ground, and I want to start with that between what Josh just laid out and my point of view. I entirely agree that the confirmation process lacks substance. I also agree that judicial nominees are coached to avoid giving substantive answers. The three moves that Professor Blackman and his co-writer Professor Barnett describe in their paper that this talk comes out of are exactly accurate. That is, what nominees do to avoid answering questions is exactly right. I entirely agree with them. And that nominees give pat and unhelpful answers, and that the confirmation process is a meaningless ritual that does not illuminate the true qualities of justice. I entirely agree with all of those points. But now, here's where I want to emphasize our differences. And those differences are in both what I consider and what Professor Blackman considers both the cause and the cure for these problems. On both of these points, I disagree. That is, the diagnosis that Blackman and Barnett offer for what's wrong, what causes the problem in our in our nomination process is that it's become too political, that senators care about results of cases instead of judicial philosophy, and that they therefore ask the wrong questions. That's what he thinks the problem is that senators aren't focused on philosophy, but they're focused on results. And so the cure, naturally, once you accept that premise, is, well, that senators should ask the right sort of questions, that they should ask what justices think about what the Constitution means and not how they would apply it. Now, let me say what's wrong with that diagnosis. That is, what's wrong with thinking that that's what the problem is with our confirmation process. The problem is our Constitution and our democratic reality makes it inevitable that senators and the presidents who nominate justices are going to care only about results and not about judicial philosophy, because the court has such enormous power over so many aspects of our lives. The court decides so many issues that we all care extremely deeply about. Civil rights, abortion, same-sex marriage, presidential power, the validity of the Affordable Care Act and every other federal law, gun rights, free speech, Citizens United, congressional power, etc., etc. That is what the court has such power over our lives that, of course, when a nominee is put before us, what we care about is what are they going to do to us, right? How is it going to affect our lives? Not, what is their philosophy? To the extent that we care about philosophy, because we care about the results, because we care about what they're going to do to us. Senator McConnell, Mitch McConnell, the majority leader of the Senate, just this week said that blocking Judge Garland's nomination to the Supreme Court was the most important decision of his career. And I think he's probably right, that it was the most consequential decision. It was enormously consequential to not have 5 liberals on the court and to block Garland, so in the hope that, that Trump would be elected and he was right, and then Gorsuch gets put on the court, and now it's 5-4 the other way. That has enormous consequences to all of our lives. And given the reality of the role of the court in our lives, it is just impossible that the president and the Senate won't be focused on how a nominee will decide actual cases that matter to the American people. So any concern about judicial philosophy, whether they're originalist or non-originalist, only matters to anyone, with the possible exception of law professors, because of the effect that it will have on our lives. That is how they will decide cases. Think about it in terms of the politics of it. The president and senators campaign, suppose they campaign on a pro-life platform. They will get grief from their constituents if they vote to confirm a justice who provides the crucial vote to uphold Roe versus Wade. And it will convince no one if they say, but the nominee showed a good understanding of the original meaning of the Due Process Clause. That will not matter to anyone, because what people care about is what's going to happen to my abortion rights, or are they going to keep murdering innocent babies? That is, people don't care about philosophy except to the extent that it matters for cases. And the same is true about gun rights, or same-sex marriage, Citizens United, president's power. All these questions about philosophy only matter because of how deeply we care about how they're going to decide actual cases. The Republican Party became the party that advocates originalism, not because of some abstract idea about how the Constitution should be interpreted, that it wasn't a commitment to that is the correct interpretive result in the abstract. It was because they opposed the results that they saw coming from non-originalism, and they thought, they wanted to support nominees who would reach better results. And so if originalism doesn't actually reach the results that the Republican Party hopes that it will, they'll stop peddling that, and they'll stop caring about philosophy. Philosophy only matters because of these results. So Josh argues that confirmation today is too political. If only we could get the senators not to care about politics. We could go back to the good old days, before Judge Bork, when the nominations weren't so caught up in partisan politics. But there were no good old days. That is, the confirmation process was never substantive before. It was all done behind the scenes. That is, it wasn't always a public fight about it, but it was always substantive. But the more important problem is we can't take politics out of the judicial nomination process because the court has so much power over our lives. And this is the only way that we can control who's on the court. That is, who is on the court matters so much to all of us because of what the result is going to be. So we can't take the politics out of it because it is political. Now, now that's what's wrong with his diagnosis, but even if you accept it, the cure is no better. That is, asking questions about clauses rather than cases doesn't cure the problem with the court. That is, for one thing, the distinction between clauses and cases is illusory. That is, if you ask, as he proposed to asking, does the Second Amendment protect an individual right to keep firearms for non-militia purposes, is identical to asking, do you think Heller was correctly decided? And the only reason we care about either of them isn't because of some abstract notion of judicial philosophy. It's because we want to know, are they going to take away our gun rights? Or are they going to allow the states to restrict gun ownership? It's because we care about the result, not about some abstract idea of philosophy. In any event, even if they ask these originalist questions, the moves that the nominees make will be identical. They will continue to avoid answering the questions that will place their nominations at risk. Here, Orrin Kerr, who's a George Washington professor on the conservative side, says, here's how I said.
Southern California.
Oh, he moved. That's right. Sorry. Thank you. Thank you for correcting. Yeah. Well, Peter has more leeway. He's on his home court.
Home field advantage. Okay.
Yeah. So Orrin says, here's how I think nominees would respond if asked substantive questions based on originalism instead of about cases. They would say, he says this, Senator, the best way to interpret that provision is deeply contested. As you know, law professors write 100-page articles on these questions, and they cannot agree among themselves. The world-class experts at the best universities themselves cannot agree, even after spending years or even decades on the question. If I'm lucky enough to be confirmed, I would study this question very closely. If it was necessary to decide a particular case, I would then apply the law to the facts to reach the correct result. That is, they can make the identical moves that they make now to duck answering the original question that Josh advocates that they make now if they think that that's what it would take to get confirmed. And in any event, the focus on the hearings will remain on what it is now. What will this person do if they're put on the court to us? What result will they can we predict they will have for guns, for gays, for God? No matter what questions are asked, no matter how we phrase the questions, that is what we're going to care about. So, as I say, I disagree with Josh both about the diagnosis and the cure, but let me give you my diagnosis and my cure, which are very different. The problem in our confirmation process the problems are not caused by the confirmation process. The problems begin and end with our ancient and outdated Constitution. For one thing, the Constitution uses such broad language that it does not provide any basis to resolve the many questions before the court. Most of the major questions before the court can't be resolved based on the text of the Constitution. There's no single correct interpretation of the original meaning of the Constitution, or at least no interpretation that resolves the key questions that we care about. Free speech. The Constitution says there should be a protection for free speech, but it leaves to all of us in future generations to figure out what free speech means. There's no answer to what the free speech clause protects other than there should be something called free speech. That was, if you study the original meaning of free speech, that is it. They immediately disagreed when it started coming to applications. Was the Alien and Sedition Act constitutional? They had no idea when they adopted the First Amendment what the scope of free speech was. They just said there should be something called free speech. So the text doesn't give you an answer. And the same is true for all of the other enormous problems that the court answers. And again, given these fundamental conflicts over what answers the court should give, who gets on the court will be crucial. But the Constitution itself gives no basis to answer the question, so the judges are on their own. It doesn't even give you a answer to how what methodology we should use for interpreting the Constitution. No guidance at all. The problems in the Constitution are not inevitable. If you look at other constitutions, they don't have the same problems that we do because they have been updated. They're newer. For one thing, many constitutions, unlike ours, provide an interpretive methodology. If you look at the South African Constitution, it says how to interpret the Bill of Rights, how to resolve conflicts between the Bill of Rights and statutes, how to make these interpretive moves. If they provide methods for weighing How do you decide when a right is at stake that conflicts with some other principle? How do we resolve this? Our court is just on its own, making it up. And so, there's no guidance. And now two other features of our Constitution make the role of the court even more important, much more important than other constitutional courts, and which therefore make the confirmation battles much more inevitable and deeply important than in other constitutional systems. And I just want to mention these. One is the lifetime appointment feature of our Supreme Court. Unlike every other modern constitution that sets appointment by terms, ours makes our justices appointed for life. And so appointments are therefore very rare, unpredictable, and deeply important. That is, because of the infrequency and permanency of them, who gets on the court is so important that the confirmation battle will be very hard fought. And second, and equally important, is the extreme difficulty of amending our Constitution. Unlike every other Constitution, ours is the most hard, the hardest Constitution to amend of all the constitutions in the, certainly among Western democracies and others. Much harder than other constitutions. And the result is that when there's pressure for change, as there was for same-sex marriage, as there was for equal rights for women, as there was for abortion rights, as there is for gun control, as there was for gun rights on the other side, that is to have it be an absolute right, or at least a right for individuals. All of the focus, or much of the focus, is on the courts, because it's impossible to change our Constitution. If we want change at that level, we focus on the courts, getting the right people on the courts, instead of focusing on the amendment process. So the campaign for same-sex marriage, although it happened at the states and happened through legislative process, won because of the membership on the court. And the same is true for every other issue that we care about. Because of the difficulty of amending our Constitution, the court matters so much. So I think the reason why we fight so much about the confirmation process, why the confirmation process matters so much, why justices nominees have a incentive not to give their real answers, is because our Constitution is dysfunctional in all of these ways. So since I think the problem is with our Constitution, and that makes the role of the court too important, my solution is to change the Constitution. That, I think, is the right answer. Now, of course, it's not a very realistic solution, given the extreme difficulty of amending the Constitution and the veneration that so many of us hold for the Constitution. I wish, though, we could start over. I know Josh carries around a pocket Constitution.
Close to my heart.
Yeah. On the left side, even. That's awesome. Personally, I wish we could start over and adopt a Constitution that didn't give the court so much power, that didn't leave so many questions unresolved and unanswerable, and gave more guidance to the court. But barring that, I do have a couple of other more modest solutions that are probably still pie in the sky, but are at least, I think, worth thinking about. One is term limits for the Supreme Court, and this is a solution that Steve Calabresi, one of the founders of the Federalist Society, agrees with. He supports an amendment that would make non-renewable 18-year appointments to the court that would be on a staggered basis, so that every president would get 2 nominees. That is, for every 4 years, you'd get 2 nominees. It would be very regular, so that the turnover would be more regular. And so because of it being more predictable, each nomination might be less consequential. I might also suggest, and this is something that could be done without even a constitutional amendment, enlarging the number of justices. 9 justices makes 5 to 4 results extremely likely, and so every nomination is so crucial. I might suggest maybe going up to 21. I think 21 might be a good number.
Panels or without panels?
I'm undecided about that. I think probably panels is better, but it makes the process more cumbersome. I haven't thought more deeply about that. Hey, am I taking questions yet? I need to give the impression that I have answers to all of these thoughts. But again, this is just, this is just a suggestion, But at least if you had more justices, having one new justice wouldn't swing the court in some very dramatic way and change all of our lives. But more dramatic I would like the solution that I think would take a lot of the pressure off the court and make the nomination process much less harried and much less combative is if we change the amendment process to the Constitution to make it easier to amend, so that there'd be less pressure on the court to resolve all major questions. That is making everything a question of interpretation of our ancient Constitution that just is not designed to and cannot handle answering all of the questions that we put. So, with that, I will stop, and I think, does Josh get a chance to respond now? Or and then we'll open it up. All right, anyway, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for
You're all very fortunate to have such wonderful professors like Mr. Goldstein and on your faculty. So let me start where we agree. We both agree it's bad when courts make stuff up. I think we both agree on that. So we're on the same page there. But we probably disagree on why it's bad. You probably never thought of this. What's the difference between a court and a legislature? Whoa, right? If you have a legislature, you vote for people who will advance policies, values, legislation, etc. that you want. Ultimately, with a member of the state house or Congress, what you care about is how they vote. Do they vote yes or do they vote no on a bill? And members of the state house or the Congress are challenged on results. Do they get the results? Do they bring home the bacon? Do they advance bills? Do they sponsor legislation? Right? That's what legislature is. Courts are supposed to be something different. At least in the federal system, courts are asked to resolve cases or controversies according to some sort of neutral principle of law. If the confirmation hearing teaches the lesson, I think Jared made the point well, that all we care about is results, philosophy is just a means to results, then why do we have courts? Right? What's the point of having a super legislature of 9 people, given 5 or 4 of one side or the other decides the most consequential events of our day? I think that's a travesty. So long as we have our Constitution, Jared, if you amend it, it's going to be a little bit longer than this. It's not going to fit in my pocket. It's going to be maybe, like an encyclopedia-sized Constitution like in South Africa, right? How many articles do they have now?
I downloaded it was a 150-page PDF.
Yeah, okay, so it's not going to fit in my pocket. But so long as we have our Constitution and we have a written Constitution, I want judges to stick by it. Now, we don't agree on how much room originalism gives, right? We can have another debate on this maybe next semester. But I do think originalism provides a lot more ground for resolving cases than judges will perceive. And the role that stare decisis plays and the role originalism plays, I think, are out of whack. I think, like Justice Thomas says, originalism should play more of a role than does stare decisis. If the case is wrong, it's wrong, even if we stood by it for a long time. Unless you disagree with me, think of a case like Plessy versus Ferguson, which was on the books for almost 80 or 90 years. So we do agree on a lot. We want courts to get it right. We don't want courts to make stuff up, but how to get there. And respectfully, the way to get there is to say, how will a judge interpret it? If a judge gives the spiel Oren Kerr gave, say, Senator, that, if a judge gives the spiel Oren gave, say, you know what, that's not good enough. You're about to be confirmed. I want answers. Give me supplemental writings. Whoa. Before I cast a vote, give me a supplemental writing. Answer the damn question now, not when you have life tenure, because you're not going to. Right? You can skate so long as the senators let you skate. But if they press and they force a judge to commit to writing to an idea, that has significance. And the next hearing, they're going to be ready for that question. And the next hearing after that, they'll be ready for the second question. This is an iterative process. And if we have another 1, 2, 3, 4 confirmation hearings next couple of years, this can actually make some ground. Okay, I'll stop there. Any anything response? We go Q&A. What's your preference?
I could give a brief response to that. It's fine. I agree with you, by the way, on the first point you made for sure. That there should be a difference between judges and legislators, and that in a perfect world we should judge our court by its, philosophy and by its adherence to, by its process and not by its results. But we don't live in a perfect world. We live in a world in which the court has because of our Constitution, has all this power. So inevitably, they will be judged based on results. So my point wasn't it was good that we judge them based on results, but it's an inevitable feature of our constitutional and democratic system.
Okay, I'm good with that.
We'll open it up to questions.
Yeah, questions, please, from the students. Yes.
Don't cut off Carl and Peter if they have questions.
Oh, and I didn't mean that, and professors as well. But we'll give the students privilege first. Yeah.
So I think having them answer questions more with actual answers rather than just sort of like skating around it is beneficial because we want to know what they really think. But what is stopping them from even in those supplemental writings changing their answer once they're on there and saying, well, I taken some more time to review this, and now I think that this is a better way to go about it. I think it's really easy to change your mind, even if you didn't actually change your mind.
Yeah. So it's a very good question. Let me show you something. If you go to the Clarence Thomas hearings and you read his testimony, you wouldn't recognize him. He was talking about the due process clause and substantive due process and how the Constitution protects aspects of liberty, and I don't think he's stuck by it. And that's perhaps another ground of agreement. I like the 18U proposal. I actually like that. I think it's a good idea to shorten their terms. Once on their bench, you can't stop them. But I think it does allow you to criticize them. You say, well, if you said this during a confirmation hearing, and then you're doing the opposite of X, what gives? And they're immune from pressure for sure, but I presume judges are not crooks. They're not dishonest people. They're not con men. And if they say something, they'll try to stick to it. A good example is, of course, John Roberts, who breaks my heart every year. And he said, I want the court to be an institution. I want the court not to have these 5-4 cases. Hello, Obamacare. Right? So at least one judge stuck to his guns, unfortunately. John Roberts, by the way, told us exactly what he thought. I've read his entire confirmation hearing. He told us exactly what he thought, just no one was paying attention. No one was paying attention. I wasn't paying attention. I was in college. But, no one was paying attention at the time.
If I could
Please.
just
Please.
respond briefly
Please.
to your answer to this question, into something you said before, I do think that when nominees are asked questions about clauses, if they give the Orrin Carr answer, then they can say, no, tell me what you really think. I just think that the answers are not going to be illuminating. And this may be a difference about how illuminating originalism is. But for instance, if they're asked, about what does the Equal Protection Clause mean? I think, to be honest, what the actual answer of what the original meaning of the Equal Protection Clause, that is what those words meant in the context when they were adopted, was, people who are similarly situated should be treated similarly. That is, basically Aristotle's idea of equality. Treat people equal when they're equal. That was it. That was all that those words meant. But what that means in practice is anybody's guess, right? That is, who are the equal people? Were men and women equal? That is, the framers of the 14th Amendment certainly didn't think so. Did they think that transgender people should be treated the same as other people? They had no conception of transgender people, right? So how this original meaning would be applied, what sometimes is called the construction zone in originalism, is totally up for grabs. So they can give an answer. What is the original meaning of the Equal Protection Clause that is entirely unilluminating about what that is going to mean in practice? Treat people alike who are alike doesn't tell you who do you think is alike and who counts or not. For one, I think that the original meaning doesn't extend beyond that much. And that's true, I think, for all of the important questions that we care about under the Constitution. Now, you'll disagree as an originalist, but I think, you might not disagree on equal protection, but free speech, there was a principle. There should be free speech, and you could say the framers thought that speech should be protected in some indeterminate way that we get to now figure out. So I think you
what
can
does
make them
protect mean, though? It's not the Equal Treatment Clause. Protection. Oh, another debate.
Yeah. But I mean, we could,
Protection.
you could ask whether the text in the original meaning is more illuminating than I think it is. But I think the original meaning is just there should be a principle of equality. We'll work that out later. What that's going to mean.
Yeah.
Did the focus at some point change in the nomination process from individual qualifications to the results? Because I know that it wasn't very long ago all judicial nominations were getting confirmed without almost any.
No, that never happened. No. And Jared made this point. Well, but not all of them went through. They were mostly close to unanimous. So the idea of the confirmation hearing didn't start to Louis Brandeis, right? He was the first Jewish justice of the court, and there was an ounce of anti-Semitism there, if you read some of the people opposing him, just a little bit. Also, his progressivism didn't rub people the right way. But he didn't have to testify on his own, right? And it wasn't until Felix Frankfurter that you actually had a nominee testifying about substantive matters. Again, another Jewish justice, but that's how things go back in the day. But then there wasn't anything grilling them. It wasn't the same sort of grilling that I'm proposing. In fact, I don't think the sorts of questions Randy and I advance have ever been asked of a nominee, which is the point. They've always been asked about things that aren't very important. So, for example, Whizzer White, right? Justice Byron White. He was a former football player. His hearing was about, tell us about your football days, right? Those are the questions, right? You know, that'd be fun. But then you have Robert Bork, right? Then you have Neil Gorsuch, you know, Elena Kagan, and it gets a little bit more grueling. But there was never this idealized state that I'm restoring back to. This is something that we're trying to move forward towards. Questions?
Please. My question is with the, and just not necessarily directed at this particular question, but with the focus being on all these particular issues that are very politically controversial, do you think that that focus is a detriment to cases that aren't flashy? The overwhelming majority of the cases that the court decides year in and year out. We focus on the 2 or 3 that will be released every year on June 30th, and not the highly technical stuff that, you know, your eyes start to water.
Yeah, what a good question. Do you want to take this one?
Well, I mean, when you say is it a detriment to those cases, I don't think so. I mean, that is the fact that there's a lot of attention on these high-profile cases. I don't think hurts what, you know, the results or the process in the other cases. Every year, well, as you know, I teach this course on the Supreme Court, and I take students to the court, and, you know, of all the, you know, done it for, I don't know, 10 years now, and we usually get 2 cases, so we've had, say, 20 cases, and of those, I'd say one of them was a high-profile case, and the other 19 were medium or low-profile cases. And when you watch advocacy in the Supreme Court, even in the low-profile cases, the advocacy is at a very high level, and the justices are engaged at a very high level. That is, they're very well prepared, even on very technical questions. And I think, I mean, as I said, I mean, I think that they're just better at what they do, you know, in these very detailed questions than, say, Congress is in what it does, and the president is on what they do, which is why. This is unrelated. Why I think that there should be cameras in the court, so that we will have one branch of government that people can look to and say, there's a branch that actually is pretty good at what they're doing. But but I do think that it gets less attention. But I still think that the advocacy is very high, and the work that the court engages in, you know, is still at a very high level. So I'm not sure what harm flows from it. It's true though that in the confirmation hearings, it doesn't get this, you know, issues of statutory interpretation, deference to administrative branches tend to get less airtime than, and although they may be more important than these high-profile interpretive questions.
Most cases decided 9-0. The average public doesn't know that. And the obsession on the 5-4s neglect the fact that when it's an obscure tax case or ERISA, right, or interpreting a securities exchange case, right? They're 9-0s. They all agree. Ginsburg, Roberts, Kagan, Thomas, they all agree. I always try to highlight the fact there's agreement. But at the hearings, they're not asking, you know, what's your view on ERISA, right? No one's going to be asking that question. They should. ERISA matters to people a lot more than some common law issues do. Other questions? Professor Margulies. Yes, sir. My esteemed colleague.
Actually, more about the nomination process than the confirmation process, and it's about who we should nominate to be Supreme Court justices.
Not law professors.
Well, right, that question for a second, but I was thinking more in terms of the tendency of weight to appoint sitting judges, particularly federal appellate judges, to the Supreme Court. Do you think that is a good idea, or should we open up the process more? As I recall, Elena Kagan was the only person recently who's been confirmed who had not previously been a judge. So should we go more in that direction, including, for example, politicians?
Well, very good question Peter poses. So back in the day, back whenever this day was, there was a preference for appointing people to the court of political experience, right? Earl Warren was a governor of a large state. Right, Hugo Black was a senator of a sitting state. Even you have a guy like William O. Douglas, who was a SEC commissioner, right, law professor, but also politically involved. Robert Jackson was the Attorney General of the United States. Right, these people held political positions, and that simply dwindled. John Roberts served in the Reagan administration. Scalia served in the administration. But now you have Kagan, who was basically a law dean. Gorsuch served in the Bush administration, but not particularly high level, but not with elected experience. I think Sandra O'Connor was the last justice who had held elected office at the time. I think that's worth considering. Also, different backgrounds of life. Defenders, prosecutors, people who have had experience in the courtroom. Justice Sotomayor is the only justice who actually was a district court judge, which is, I think, an important tack because she has some perspectives on the record. She's a stickler for the record, though. She really, and because she gets it, she was a trial court judge. She was a stickler for the record. Yeah, I think those sorts of diversities, even geographic diversity, believe it or not, there used to be a preference having geographically diverse senators. As Justice Scalia said, there's no judges in the vast in between, right? You have Roberts from Indiana, everyone else from the coast, right? You had justices from 4 of the 5 boroughs in New York City for a point. And Scalia said, Justice Kennedy from Sacramento, that doesn't count as the West. So, so I don't know what that counts for, Jerry.
No, I agree with everything that you just said. Good. I mean that there's some advantages to having people from different backgrounds, especially having different experiences in government, so that when the court often has to opine about the democratic process and both the political process, the administrative process, have somebody who had some experience with it on a practical level, because sometimes the court will say things that just seem crazy to me, and I think that would seem crazy to people who have been involved in politics. Like much of what the majority says in Citizens United, I think is crazy and might have been different if it had been written by someone who had been involved in electoral politics. But it's not just that. I mean, did everyone go to Harvard or Yale? Are we? That can't be right.
Yeah, no, I think
it almost was.
Yeah, no, we're there now.
Yeah.
Went to Columbia.
Well, she graduated from Columbia, but you started at Harvard.
Yeah. I mean, so that is it's. I'm not saying, that we. Well, I do think that that there is.
Roger Williams for law school for the Supreme Court, right?
Hey, I'll put some people in this very room. I'm willing to nominate.
Under the Goldstein Constitution, law professor can nominate judges. That's a new proposal. Lord help us.
I know we're going to have an
grading on a curve, though.
3Ls, because I know there's a mandatory meeting at 1 o'clock.
We breaking?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think we're going to
all
have
right.
to because of this.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Jared. So there's a movie called